Oh, it's right here. Holy shit. They put it just in. It's so early. It's so early. What? It's this early. What? That's crazy. That's crazy. Alright, so for those of you that haven't watched the stream or blocked me on all social platforms ever since I rated OTs like a 5 or a 6 or whatever last year, newsflash, I don't really like them ever since. And I'd like to talk about why. Because, obviously, times have changed and so do people and their opinions. This is for standard? True, this is for standard, yeah. But even for standard, I would prefer them not to be there. Even for standard, I would prefer them not to be there than to be there. Because, like, if you watched, for example, yesterday's anime episode, I think part of what made it so cool is that, like, it was a very calculated out fight where every single action mattered and the OT had no part of it. And that's the kind of fights I want to be having more and more and more of. And the OT has no part of that. But basically, here are some reasons why my opinion of the OT has changed so much. The first one is that, well, I think when OverTrigger started, it was kind of like a novelty mechanic, and I was willing to give it a chance, and also because everyone was so negative back then, I kind of wanted to just be devil's advocate just for the sake of it. But I also think it wasn't as problematic because the format was a bit slower. But the moment that they introduced grade 4s into OverDress, every deck started to be able to triple drive, which means that the average speed at which you go through the deck, and as a result see the OT, went up tremendously. And there was actually a blog post, a Japanese blog post back in freaking December or January that said, because that basically said, like, if they keep releasing grade 4s that all have triple drive, OverDress will become a format where it's just whether you check the OT or don't. And at the time I was like, that's not entirely the case, but then kind of watching a lot of competitive play and then watching, going to tournaments a lot myself, it's like, yeah, if you do check the OT, you do win usually. Or like, if you do see the OT, your chance of winning goes up tremendously. And it's just annoying when it's like you have, you know, you have a deck of 50 cards, and you carefully craft the 50 cards to work together so that all 50 cards result in you getting to victory or getting a win or, you know, being better than your opponent because you played with the 50 cards that you built your deck around in a better way, right? But then there's now one of those 50 cards that doesn't really care about how good your deck building is because, or like how good you are as a player, because it'll reward you no matter what, you know? Or sometimes it'll fuck you up no matter what, because it's like, oh, you needed one counterblast and you check first damage OT and your opponent just passes, and now it's like, that's it. It's like, in that sense, my dislike for them has gone up a lot. And in premium, does this survey ask about premium separately, or is this the only time they ask about the OT? For those of you that have done the survey, can you tell me? Doesn't ask about premium separately? Okay, then let me talk about it here then. When you lose, you want to reflect on how you lost, but if you died by the OT, there's not much reflecting? Exactly, right? If I win by the OT, I don't feel like I deserve that win. If I lose thanks to the OT, I don't feel like I deserve that loss either, right? So that's another interesting argument that I saw over the weekend, is like, when the 12 crit thing happened last year, September, and they basically went like, oh, you're limited to running 8 of a crit, or like 8 crit per deck, and no more than that. They responded in a heartbeat, like in a flash. But somehow the OT never got that kind of response. Like, they were willing to admit they fucked up with the crit thing, but they're not willing to admit they fucked up with the OT. And it's not, from a business standpoint, the OT is unbannable in standard. Like, let's face it, as much as we dislike it, there is no way the OT is going to be banned in standard. There is just not gonna, it's not gonna happen, because I think it would kill the game if the OT was banned in standard, because all shops will discontinue the game. Every single card shop will no longer stock the game because it's stocking dead product, and you just fuck them out of so much money by, like, they have so many OTs in stock that they sell for over $10 an OT, obviously, and that makes them a lot of money, and the OT is like a must purchase if you want to get into Vanguard, so it makes shops a lot of money. And it's also in a bunch of starter products, so it's like you literally cannot start playing Brandgate or Dragon Empire because there's no starter product for those nations without the OT in it, therefore they're illegal decks. So the OT per se cannot be banned in standard, but it can be errata'd, it can be errata'd in standard, or you can make a mechanic that forces you to choose to play an OT or the new mechanic. And I think that that is the natural progression to getting the OT out of the image, is to make a mechanic that is so worth playing and so good for every single deck that you can tell the player base you have to choose between this and the OT, and the whole community needs to choose that somehow. And like, and I'm not talking necessarily about like a G zone or anything, but like the OverTrigger, oh my god, that'll make the new mechanic the new problem. No, but like that's the thing, you don't have to make it bigger and crazier, right? It's just that you need to make it more well-rounded or something along those lines. Like anything that makes you not select it. I don't know what it would have to be, but that is my, when I think about them, that's the only thing I can come up with. Because having to errata them to be 10k power is messy, because then it's like, okay, people get into the game and then they play with the card, and then it's like you have to, like, people buy the trial deck and they, you know, they get into the game and they don't know yet about this errata. So how are they supposed to know that it's only 10k now, right? Ride deck OT, that maybe should have been the case from the start, or something like that. Like trigger nullifiers, yeah, like something like that. Like complete trigger nullification of some sort or whatever. I don't really know. It's hard. So that's like my, for standard at least. But, so that's the discussion for standard, right? But then we talk about premium. Premium is a legacy format that is played by players, or let's say like largely by players that have been around for longer than new players, right? Because they are invested in the franchise and they've owned these cards for probably longer than like 5 years. And so they're kind of used to these big changes and stuff like that. And because Premium is not the format that's like, yo, get into Vanguard with Premium. It's like, no, get into Vanguard with Standard, right? So Premium's never like on the flashlight in that sense. Not in the flashlight, in the spotlight, sorry. Premium isn't in the spotlight like that. So you can afford to do more controversial things with Premium. Controversial, don't forget, is both good and bad. And get away with it, because it's not the main thing. So if you ban OTs in Premium, there will actually be nothing but good that comes out of it for the most part, because it's like, well, Premium players are used to their cards like potentially getting banned and being unplayable. Like, you know, if you could ban Katrina and tell the entirety of the Neonectar player base to fuck off, then you can tell OTs to fuck off. Like, that's just, you know, and like, just how you told, you know, like, you had people buy Keter OTs and play them in Ultima, and then you told them, fuck off, don't play your Keter OT, or don't play your Ultima that you paid $80 for. If you can afford to do that, then you can afford to get rid of OTs in Premium. Like, there is nothing stopping them from killing OTs in Premium, because Premium is not the main format. Premium is not the, like, the shiny new toy that you use to advertise this game to the world, right? Like, that's why I think, to begin with, OTs should have been gone in Premium a long time ago. They don't belong there. They don't belong there because it's not even a question. I'm trying to not turn this into a question of like, Premium is the ultimate, most competitive format, you know, which I know people are, like, do believe that, and I think there is some truth to it. But then people also say like, oh, does that mean like other formats aren't competitive? Like, no, it doesn't. I think all formats are competitive. Personally speaking, I think all formats are competitive, and I think that all of them, you can be competitive in Standard and then play none of the other formats, and you are nonetheless valid than someone that is only competitive in Premium, is my personal stance. Because I think you can be competitive in everything. It's your personal perspective and how you approach a game or a format. But I think more so the point is that Premium players are used to losing cards. Premium players are used to the fact that if they play something broken, chances are it's dead. I built Ripples now with Odysseus, knowing that all of my, like, that majority of the cards in that deck will be useless in 6 months' time. Like, I am well aware. As I bought Odysseus, I was well aware that I'm putting down money for a card that will be banned in 6 months' time, if not less, because that's just how it is. Like, it's a broken game design that may have been overlooked, most likely, but I'm like, I'll abuse it for now because I want to win some tournaments, and I'm fine with that. So Same for OverTriggers. It's like, yes, I will abuse this broken mechanic because why would I not? Because it will result me in losing less or losing more or winning more, like winning less, like depending on when it's checked. But by not playing them, I will always be losing more and winning less. So, you know, and if you can like print Ichishima and ban her immediately, you can also ban OTs. Like there's no real thing holding them back from banning them in premium, but there is a lot of factors blocking them from banning them in standard. And it's not a black and white discussion of like, if you don't ban them in standard, that means standard is, you know, it's not serious and it's not real and it's like, why would you ever play it? But it's like, I still have a gripe with OTs in standard too, but you have to understand that from a company, from a business perspective, it doesn't work like that. Like, they cannot do that. It's not a question of pride, it's a question of losing stores. It's a question of the game dying, because that's just how major it is. Nemain was one card, and look what that did. Nemain nearly killed the game because of how badly stores wanted to dissociate with the game after the Nemain hit, after they wasted money on picking up Nemains. That was one card for one clan out of 24. You want to do that with a mechanic that is game-wide for every single nation, every single deck, for the whole player base? You can't do that. You literally cannot do that. And like, that's the thing where I would much rather they get rid of OverTriggers in Premium this September and let them rock in Standard until they find a way to address it without necessarily getting rid of them in Product. Or we have to wait until the next round of entry Product, or they do this thing again where the actual starter deck doesn't contain the OverTrigger, and then they print enough starting product without the OT that they can then go, goodbye OT. Like, there's a few directions this can go in, but overall, it can go in Premium because of what I've mentioned, but in Standard they've dug themselves too deep of a hole to get out of right now, right? And it's just, it's not workable in my opinion. So, but I also don't think that the OT existing in Standard means that Standard is bad or that Standard is not competitive. Standard is, together with Premium, my favorite format. Ever since coming to Japan and having a community to play locally Premium with, and having a very active Standard community, I've been really enjoying Standard and Premium, realizing that like I've been kind of like Stockholm syndroming myself into V, which is weird because I know a lot of people feel that the other way around. I've been really enjoying Premium and Standard, and especially Standard. Like, when I made yesterday's video about Nirvana, I was having fun, and like reading all the comments and people going like, oh, I didn't know this interaction, I didn't know that. It's like, people go like, oh, Standard is for babies, Standard is so easy, Standard is so simple, it's just turn card sideways. But it's like, okay, if that's the case, then why are there things that I point out in a 4-minute video that there's still like interaction that people don't know? And it's like, I feel like Standard has been so, like, I feel like OverTrigger has been so amazing for the game in just 1 year, more so than any other era of the game, but the one thing holding it back is OverTriggers, and that one thing that holds it back makes people ignore everything else that is good about it, which is my biggest gripe right now. And the reason why I say that is like, I review Standard after a year of it existing, and I think of things like, first, like the insane depth of design in terms of like, they were like, what if we make spells? But then we also make set spells. And then we make those set spells have different functionality, like, you know, whether it's a base, whether it's a prison, whether it's like a counter, whether it's, you know, like just a like soul charge card or whatever, whether it's to enable boosts, like, you know, literally add field spells to the game that never had them for 10 years. They just went and did them. And it's like, wow, I would have never believed this. What if we took equipments from Buddyfight and put them into Vanguard and managed to make it function? They did that, and the deck is really cool and fun. And like, honestly, when you play at a high level in Standard against a player that is also of a high, like, competitive level, there's so many micro decisions to make in terms of, like, damage denying. Like, I played a round against the Kyrie opponent where he had all 4 damage face down, and I swung with my Vanguard, and he had, like, a 8-card hand or something, and he took it at 4. And I had triple drive, and I was like, if I check a crit, I win. He's like, that's fine. And I checked the crit and I won. And he's like, I did that because then if I guarded that, you would stop attacking and I wouldn't have CB and I couldn't do anything. And I was like, that is true, but you're expecting me to be good enough to know that. And the average player might have just swung and given you CB. So it's like, things like that is also like, I feel like it didn't have this in V back at the start of V, you know, within the first year. Like, on top of that, Ride Deck is incredible. Ride Deck is really, really good. And on top of that, like, there's so many different ride lines, which some people will point out that ride lines are a bad thing. I think they're a good thing, that there's so many different ones, because they're very easy to support. You just need to sprinkle in 1 or 2 cards here and there to make it, like, updated. Look at Greedon, literally. Greedon, give it a countercharger, boom, that's it. Don't need to print any more cards. That's it. We're done. We're done. Greedon is much better already. Like, that's how easy it is to support a ride line. 1 card. 1 card with a good skill. That's all it took. It's not that they need to, like, you know, give out a whole booster set every year to support each ride line. 1 or 2 cards is enough, and that's it. I feel like there's so many good things about Standard and so many amazing things about Overdress that the OverTrigger just overshadows, pun not intended, that I feel like they could be, that, you know, there should be more talking about that as well. But again, the OT will always overshadow that. And it's always sad to me to hear like, oh yeah, my locals doesn't play Overdress, we only play like V, or like, we only play Premium. And it's like, but there's so much in Overdress to be enjoyed. And it's always a little bit sad to me to hear that. But yeah, the exception is, I guess, Lyrical. Lyrical is spreading itself a bit too thin, I think, at some points. But yeah, 1 card can just rekindle someone's love for the game. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I didn't even talk about another thing about Premium. I didn't even bring this up. I was talking about this with Derek, and I did want to bring this up in stream / in a video too. But I was talking about this with Derek as well, and we're talking about OTs and Premium specifically, and it's like, every turn in Premium, for those of you that don't play Premium, is very explosive. Like, everything from turn 3 and onwards, where there exists a grade 2 game where neither player rides up to grade 3, because riding up to grade 3 means that your opponent can ride up to grade 3 next turn and stride, and every stride is very explosive. It can do a lot of things, like whether it's like draw a bunch of cards, or like set up so that you can actually win the next turn, or being able to like do certain things that might even win you the game on that first stride. Like, that's how explosive stride turns are. So when you have, like, and in order to make sure that you can survive your opponent's explosive first ride turn, you make various precautions like grade 2 gaming, or riding up and like playing a deck that can farm without striding so you can survive your opponent's first ride turn. And there's a lot of back and forth that goes into that, which is what makes Premium really, really cool. It's like, playing Premium is like doing surgery, where you have to be very, very, very careful at every single step, because if you miss up a little bit at one point, chances are you'll lose. And that's what people love about Premium. That's a big reason why people play the format, on top of its, you know, big card pool, and, you know, like, very expansive strategies, and like all the wacky things you can do, you know, check Nico Fernando's Twitter. But the thing is that, because of how explosive the strike turns are in Premium, when you add an OT to the explosive strike turn, let's say you ride up first, and you farm a bunch of cards to survive your opponent's first strike turn because you know what it's going to do. But then they flip the OT, and that's it. All of your preparation that you carefully farmed up to survive that strike turn, gone. You worked so carefully to survive that turn, and what happened? You lost to the OT. What could you do about it? PG? Why didn't you have another PG, bro? It's like, no, like, that's, it doesn't feel good. It just doesn't feel good for either party. And then it's like, okay, on the receiving end, right? So that's the offensive OT. So it's like, let's say on the other hand, it's like, all right, you've literally aligned all of the stars. You know, you've shaken the 2 bottles, you've best matched, and you're ready to perform your great turn of a bunch of different attacks that's gonna get you to the win. Your opponent checks for his damage OT. It's like, all right. So you pass turn, or you attack with Vanguard to get your drive checks in. Maybe you'll take it to OT yourself, and you can balance it out. But so it's like, yeah, you just do your drive checks, you pass turn, and your opponent just basically had a free turn there, which normally they would have used a bunch of their hand to survive that turn. But now they get to keep their entire hand and use that as resources to kill you back. And you don't have the resources to survive it because you just put down everything to try to finish them. And it's just like, it doesn't feel good. Like, the point of it all is that it doesn't feel good. And that's why people want the OT gone, is it doesn't feel good to play against. And it doesn't feel good to spend $400 to travel to a location for a tournament and lose for a reason like that. When it's like, when people like to bring up the example of like, oh, but what if they check double crit? It's like, oh, what if they use 6 damage heal? Thing is, you can play around 6 damage healing. Like, you can order your attack so that even if your opponent checks 6 damage heal with 0 cards in hand, you can still have something that can go over that to force out more damage. If they check triple 6 damage heal, okay, all the stars aligned, like, that, you gotta just take the L on that. Like, it's still Vanguard, and thing is, heals were always part of the game, so we've always been, we signed the contract. I think I used this analogy last year too. We signed the contract to be 6 damage shield on when we got into this game, and that's just how it is, right? But the OT came in here as like a new guy, moved into the dorm, and he's leaving all of his, you know, he's like shitting on the table, he's leaving all his like dirty laundry all over the place, you know, he's not washing the dishes. Like, dude, come on, man, we have rules in this house, and you're not obeying them. Like, you can't do that. So because of all that, like, people are just not, they're just not happy with the OT. And, you know, I just think that's basically what it is. I think that's more or less what it is, to be honest. One important thing to clarify is I honestly don't mind the extra effects, although I do think the Brand one is too much. I think some of the effects are a bit too over the top, but the number one problem is the power. So in Standard, I would personally like an errata to OverTriggers, and this reprint in set 6 would have been a perfect timing to reprint OverTriggers with 10k power. But sadly, it's not going to be the case. At least not yet. Maybe next year. Maybe next year. That'd be really cool.